So welcome to this webinar. I'm Dries Faems, a professor at WHU, and today we give you a free webinar on building startups and ventures with generative AI. How do we organize this webinar? So I will first of all just give some insights, show you a number of tools, a number of prompts that we are actually using in our own teaching and our own research to leverage generative AI for our activities. And afterwards, we will also do a small Q&A session. During the presentation, if you have questions, if you have comments, you can put them in the Q&A chat. So the normal chat we have not activated, but you can put questions in the Q&A chat. And then at the end, Nicholas will keep track of the questions, and then we will address some of the most relevant questions at the end, depending on the number of questions that are raised by the audience. So that's how we will structure it. So I will first do the presentation, and then if there are questions, we can definitely address them, both clarification and discussion questions. Okay, then let's delve in to what I want to present. So actually, this webinar is an update of a webinar that we did in May. In May, we did a first webinar on the topic of generative AI, which was called Leveraging ChatGPT for Business Development. I embedded also here again the video. Just for your information, we will also share the slides with all the registrants, so you don't have to take screenshots or whatever. We will send you all the slides so that if later on you're interested in particular aspects, you can check it yourself. So we have done a video about this topic in May, but as you might know, the domain of generative AI is evolving quickly. And it was at least our feeling that it was time to give you an update, to show a bit more recent prompting strategies, generative AI tools that can be relevant for you. And we decided today to focus on a topic that is very close to our heart, namely building startups and ventures. So that's what we will focus on today. Now, before I go into the examples, let me briefly kind of set the scene. So in the past months, we have seen an explosion of generative AI tools. I think most of you have experimented with ChatGPT, but actually other tools have been emerging, such as Claude AI, BingChat, and Perplexity AI. Now, as a kind of rule of thumb, how am I using all these tools? When I need to create more creative output, so I want generative AI to write text for me, to create new text, then I typically will reach out to tools like ChatGPT and Claude AI, which tend to be very good in this kind of creative text generation. However, these tools tend to be not performing if you really want to create factual information, if you want to retrieve information, if you want to search for information. These tools have quite a significant risk of hallucination. And in that case, so if you want to search, retrieve information, and use that in generative AI text generation, actually tools such as BingChat and Perplexity AI are much more recommendable. Why? Because these tools are actually connected to the internet. So the traditional ChatGPT is not connected to the internet, so it's a closed environment, whereas BingChat and Perplexity are connected to the internet. So when you do prompting in this kind of tools, they will actually then browse the internet to find the information and use that information to give you output. And in that way, it tends to be more reliable for kind of retrieval and search tasks. At the same time, you might know that there is this kind of ChatGPT Plus, that's the subscription model of ChatGPT. And actually, this subscription model has a number of tools available that actually allows you to do all these things with different kind of options. And I will show today a bit what kind of options you have. Yeah, so with ChatGPT, you can, at ChatGPT Plus, you can actually address the limitations of the traditional ChatGPT, and I will show that later on. So this is a wide variety of tools and approaches that we have nowadays, which, for instance, for building startups and building ventures, has a lot of advantages. And today, what I simply want to do is to give you some use cases, some specific illustrations, how we are actually in our education, but also in our research, are using these tools for startup building and venture building. And what I want to show you is that these tools can be very helpful in the discovery research stage of a startup or a venture. So when you have to do research, if you want to find competitors, if you want to do a trend analysis, how can you use these tools? I will go a bit deeper into more novel prompting strategies that you can use to leverage these tools to do valuable ID generation on value propositions. And finally, I also want to talk a bit about how these tools can be used for something like customer outreach. In the end, as a startup or a venture, you want to sell products to a customer. So customer outreach is a very important part of most startup and venture activities. And again, I want to give you an illustration on how you can leverage some of these tools to automate, customize your outreach activities to customers. So these are 3 illustrations that I want to give, and each time I will show you how different tools can be relevant. So let's start with discovery research. And as an example, I use here a recent challenge that we at WHU organized together with Schenker Ventures in one of my courses. The course is called Developing Novel Business Models. So as the title suggests, my students in that course need to develop novel business models. And in this case, they had to develop novel business models for a particular client, namely Schenker Ventures, part of DB Schenker, which is part of Deutsche Bahn. And one of the challenges that my students worked on was actually to think about novel business models about AI and automation in logistics. So you see here a document that my students received at the start of the course, describing the opportunity that DB Schenker was observing, the challenge that they wanted the students to solve, and some guidelines on how they need to do it. So this is what my students received. And so in this case, it was like, okay, we see a lot of potential in using AI to automate logistics, and we want you students to think about novel business models that can help us to accomplish this. And for instance, what DB Schenker emphasized in this challenge is that the students should leverage existing assets of DB Schenker. So they should think about how can we use existing assets of DB Schenker to build novel business models. Now, of course, that's not that straightforward for my students. My students don't know DB Schenker that well. Now, this is a first example where we can use relatively novel tools of generative AI. And let me maybe go to the actual application so that I can show you how it looks like. So I will briefly go to the ChatGPT. And so here we see, so what do we want to do here? So here we are actually in a particular web pilot of the plugin. So if you go to ChatGPT 4+, maybe I can show you that briefly to make it clear. So let's start simply a new chat. So I have GPT-4, and then you see you get a number of tools. And so one of the tools we have is that you can browse with Bing. So that means here actually ChatGPT gets connected to the internet to do searches. And so what do we do here? Quite straightforward. In this particular example, I have just asked ChatGPT to give me an overview of what DB Schenker already does in terms of using AI for logistics and automation. And what you will, maybe we can briefly show it. So I will rerun it. So what happens here, and that's different from the normal ChatGPT, is that you see it starts browsing the internet. So it starts searching for information. And based on this browsing, it gives me output. So here it's telling me, giving me examples of particular potential activities, assets that DB Schenker has done that can be relevant for automation of logistics. And moreover, it gives me links to documents where I can find more information. So in that case, you can click the link. Now, I will not do that now because actually, to be fully transparent, this weekend I prepared this exercise and I was clicking on these links, and to my big surprise, one of these links automatically sent me to a pornographic website, which was a big surprise to me. So apparently OpenAI still have some security issues because there is nothing here that would suggest that there should be a link to a pornographic website. But in that case, it shows again that mistakes are still quite common. But so normally you can click on the links and then it will send you to the particular source of the information. So in that way, it's quite reliable. So that's just the first example on how you can actually easily use this browsing tool to more easily find information and avoid hallucination. So let me give you another example and also use another tool. So I told before, Perplexity AI is a very nice tool to browse the internet. It's also free to use, so you just have to register and then you can use it. So this is not with a subscription, or at least their basic model is not with a subscription. So here what I did, here I actually asked the question, okay, can you find trend reports from consulting companies on the role of AI for automation of logistics? And then it run my prompt, and actually you see it starts with giving me a number of sources which it used, and then it will give the answer. Let me maybe go to the actual Perplexity AI so that we can see it a bit better. So here you can see this was the prompt that I made. Then it's telling, okay, I'm using these sources, and then again, it gives me an answer with the links to the sources. And for instance, you can see here, one of the sources was a LinkedIn post about the future of logistics. And so then if you click on the link, you will immediately go to the article. So then you can see the article that is found there. So again, this is how you can easily nowadays actually connect generative AI with the internet to do search activities. Let me go back to my presentation briefly. And as mentioned, then you can have this LinkedIn report about automation of logistics. Now, for instance, the next step that you then can take is to say, okay, I have my initial challenge. And so that the challenge that I showed at the beginning, and I have this document with a trend report. And so, for instance, what I simply did here, and let me go to the actual application. So here I use Claude AI, this other tool. Why do I sometimes use this tool? Because this is a convenient interface where you can upload documents. So what I did here was to upload a Word file with simply the description of the challenge, and I uploaded the document, namely this LinkedIn report. And then I simply did a prompt, explain the relevance of the pasted text. Yeah, so this LinkedIn article for solving the attached challenge. Yeah, so actually here I make a prompt asking to connect these two documents. And that's in the end what Claude AI did here in this response. So here it responded how the content of this LinkedIn document can help me to solve the challenge that was provided in the other document. Yeah, so you can see that you can start playing here with different documents and actually write prompts asking to connect insights from the different documents. So for this type of activities, Claude AI is actually a very nice tool because you can easily upload the documents and then start playing with them. So these are some examples of how when you want to do discovery research nowadays, you can do it very quickly, very efficiently, leveraging a number of tools and actually get quite reliable information. So in contrast to the standard ChatGPT, where when you asked it for factual information, the risk of hallucination was very high. In this kind of examples, because we always go to the internet and actually take existing information, the risk of hallucination has been reduced quite drastically. Okay, so that's a first example about how to leverage different tools for discovery research. Now I want to go to another important aspect in the domain of startups and ventures, namely developing value propositions. Yeah, so you have identified the pain point, and now you want to ideate on a potential value proposition. And actually, in the last webinar, we talked already a bit about this. We showed some basic prompts to do it. But what we see is that nowadays, a lot of alternative prompting strategies have been developed that actually allow us to do this in a much more extensive and professional way. Now, let us start also briefly to recap with a kind of basic prompt. So here we will do as the first example what we call zero-shot prompting. And so this is kind of the traditional prompting that most people do. So that means we do quite a straightforward prompt where we will ask it in one time to generate a value proposition. And so let me give you an example again. So I open here a new ChatGPT 4, just the basic one. So here we don't need specific tools. So we go to for the default option. And so the prompt that I paste now is I'm saying, okay, you are a fantastic expert in generating value propositions. You have awesome skills in generating creative ideas for unique value propositions. You focus on creating high quality ideas that are unique. Generate a value proposition for the following pain points. People struggle to monitor energy bills. Yeah, so I give it a specific pain point and I'm saying, look, you now need to find a value proposition. And what you also see is I'm trying to encourage it. I'm saying, oh, ChatGPT, you're so great, you're so fantastic. Can you help me? Why? Because, and nobody knows exactly why, but we know from research that if you encourage ChatGPT, if you're very friendly to ChatGPT, if you're emotional to ChatGPT, that this actually helps to improve the quality of the output. Why? Nobody knows, but there are really academic papers that show that if in your prompts you're encouraging, you're friendly, and you're emotional, that the quality of the output that is generated by ChatGPT will be higher. So that's, it's like our students. If you're friendly to them, if you encourage them, they tend to produce better outputs, and actually ChatGPT doesn't seem to be an exception. So let's briefly run this prompt, which we do here with GPT-4. And you see, indeed, it comes up with a value proposition, EcoPulse, your personal energy concern. It tells me what is the core offering. So you see, it already gives me quite some detailed information. It talks about unique selling points because I asked it to be unique. So you see that even with a straightforward prompt, but being encouraging, emphasizing it to be unique, it already gives quite a nice outcome, a specific value proposition on which you can further work. So that's the first type of prompt that we could do. So let me now go to an alternative way for the prompting, and this is what we call chain of thought prompting. And let me show you how that looks like. So in a chain of thought prompt, what we will do is we will actually give the generative AI instructions, which steps it needs to execute to actually complete the task. Yeah, so as you can see here, again, I'm saying it's the great value creator, you're fantastic, you're great, I hope you can help me. But now I'm actually telling it to follow a number of steps to generate the value proposition. Yeah? So I'm saying, okay, first think about what is actually the hardest part of the pain point that I'm giving you. Second, what is actually my optimal customer segment? Yeah? So who should I really approach? And based on that information, give me a value proposition. So now I clearly define a number of steps that it needs to do to execute the task. And this is what we call a chain of thought prompt. So let me briefly show you what it then does. So I can let it run again. And you will see that now the generative AI will perfectly follow the steps that I have defined. Yeah? So indeed, it will first try to come up with what is the hardest part of the pain point. Second, it will think about the optimal customer segment. And third, it will try to generate a value proposition that can help to solve the pain point for the optimal customer segment. So you see that if you instruct it, okay, follow this step, that generative AI will try to perfectly follow that. And in that way, typically, you can quite drastically improve the quality of your output because now you're really steering it into a certain direction. So in that way, chain of thought prompting is quite known as a prompting strategy that can really help you to improve the quality of the output of your prompts. So this is already a bit more advanced. So let's make it now even one more step advanced. And in this case, in this example, what we will do is we will move it one step further. And so here again, we will try to connect it with some other applications. So let me briefly go to my example. Yes, so we did chain of thought prompting. And so now I want to do chain of thought prompting, but on top of that, using plugins. And let me try to show you what that means. I will not run it now because it's a bit more time consuming, but I want to show you what we do here. So here we even start formulating a more advanced prompt. Yeah? So here I'm saying again, you're a great and successful entrepreneur that has extensive experience in building successful business models. Here is a job to be done. Yeah, so I want, again, paying and monitoring energy bills. This is my customer segment. And now again, I formulate a first step. So I'm saying, look, as a first step, identify the hardest part and job to be done. That's quite similar to what we did before. And then I'm saying, okay, as a second step, please execute the following tasks. First, search on the internet for existing companies that have similar value propositions. These companies need to really exist. Give me an overview of the companies that you have identified and their value proposition. Second, adjust my value proposition based on the value propositions of these existing companies. Third, critically analyze my value proposition, pretending that you're a VC expert. And finally, optimize my value proposition based on the criticisms of the VC expert. So in one single prompt, I give here ChatGPT a large number of steps and tasks that it needs to sequentially execute, also going to the internet. So here we have again enabled this plugin. And just to show you what it then does. So indeed, it starts with executing step 1, identifying hardest part and formulating a value proposition. Then it will start executing the tasks in step 2. And so it's just now repeating, okay, these are the 4 tasks that I need to do. Then again, it uses, in this case, Web Pilot. So this is one of these plugins that allows it to go into the internet to search for companies and their value propositions. And in the end, here are the value propositions that it has identified. Then, as a next task, it indeed refines my value proposition based on the value proposition of these competitors. Subsequently, it analyzes my value proposition as a VC expert. So it's giving me recommendations, criticisms about what can be improved. And finally, it will optimize my value proposition based on these criticisms. So you see that with one single prompt, we have done here one single prompt, it starts generating a huge amount of output where it continuously builds on each other. So I start with the value proposition, I ask it to find competitors, based on the competitors, optimize the value proposition, evaluate the value proposition by VC experts, and then optimize the value proposition based on the output of the VC expert. So you see that when you start building this kind of complex chain of thought prompts where you leverage also the plugins, you can actually ask ChatGPT to execute quite complex and demanding tasks in one single prompt. So that's something I think that can be quite interesting. Okay, then let me finally show you one more thing, which is quite intriguing. And this is what is called using what is called Professor Synapse in your custom instructions. And this might sound a bit abstract, but so let me explain a bit more. So you actually have all kinds of nerds that are developing very specific prompts that you can use in your custom instructions. And I will immediately show you what that means. So this is at the GitHub page of Professor Synapse. And so Professor Synapse, and I will not explain it here in detail, has created quite a complex prompt that actually allows you to create agents, kind of assistants that can help you with every task that you can imagine. And what you then simply need to do is to copy paste this prompt, and I will show you how that works, and bring it to what is called your custom instructions. And again, for this, you need ChatGPT Plus. So if I go to my personal account, I have something that is called here custom instructions. And custom instructions, let me enable it briefly. So on the one hand, in custom instructions, you can tell a bit more about yourself. And so here I've simply added information about myself, that I'm a professor, where I lived, and so on. And when you do that, every time when you run a prompt, it will take your context into account. At the same time, you can add information on how ChatGPT should respond. And so in this box, we have copy-pasted Professor Synapse. That's what we did. So now we do save. And so now my custom instruction has been enabled. And let me show you what that means. So if I now create a new chat, and I will also connect it now with the internet, and I can simply say, okay, start. and it will activate Professor Synapse. Yeah? So here, Professor Synapse is activated, and now it asks me, okay, what do you want to do? What is something that you want to do? And so I can tell again, I want to build a startup to solve the pain point of monitoring energy bills for families in apartments. Yeah, so now that's what I want to do. And now actually Professor Synapse will start identifying steps that we need to do to make this happen. Yeah? So now it's telling, okay, I will help you accomplish your goals by the following steps: conduct a market analysis, devalue the value proposition, explore technological options. So it says, okay, these are steps that you need to do. And now it will start helping you. So it says, okay, to start, could you tell me if you have conducted any market research or if you have any data? No, I'm in the initial ideation stage. So I've not done any research yet. No? And so now it actually enables a new agent called an expert in market research that will help me identifying, okay, what are the steps that I need to execute to do market research on my startup? And then it will start asking me questions. Could you specify any particular regions, types of families, or apartments that you're considering? So you could say, okay, I target Germany. And then it continues. And so you see here, and this is actually very relevant if you do not know upfront exactly what kind of activities, tasks you need to do. With Professor Synapse, it will actually start giving you guidance in all kinds of activities that you need, and it will actively help you to do them. And if, for instance, you have activated the Bing browser, it will also be able to search the internet. And so this you can use for all kinds of activities. For instance, you can also use it for data science. Yeah? So I need to do a logistic regression on this database, and then it will also help you to do so. So this is actually quite an intriguing tool. It tends to be a bit more time consuming because sometimes it's very specific in the type of questions that you ask, but for some use cases, it might actually be quite intriguing to use. So that's something else you can consider. And again, the only thing you need to do is to simply copy paste this prompt into your custom instructions, and then you can start. So in that way, it's sometimes quite an interesting tool to use. Now, I briefly now have to disable the custom instructions, otherwise Professor Synapse will keep on coming during the whole presentation, which is actually not the purpose. So let me briefly, again, disenable it. Okay, so then we don't have Professor Synapse showing up again. Yes, so this is something that you can do. Finally, as mentioned, we have created this startup, this first idea. And so when we did this complex chain of thought prompting, it actually gave me in the end this startup idea, so Family Energy Hub. Now, of course, typically what you want to do quite quickly in a startup phase is to create a minimal viable product, or at least a kind of visual representation of what you want to build. And recently, and I would say really in the past month or the past weeks, a lot of new tools have emerged that make our life very easy here. And one of the great tools is the DALL-E 3 plugin in ChatGPT. And again, let me go to the website so that I can show you. So here, for instance, so here we have enabled the DALL-E 3 plugin. So that's a plugin that can make images. And let me run again. So here I say, I prompted, create me a visual prototype for an app for the following startup, Family Energy Hub. And then you see the description that was generated by this complex chain of thought prompt. So I just copy paste the description of my startup, and then I can say save and submit. And now it will start generating a picture. Now, the interesting thing is, and I think this is really also important to understand because this will have an impact on how we do prompting in the future. DALL-E is now not automatically using my prompts to generate a visual. Actually, DALL-E is translating my prompts in other prompts, And these other prompts are then used to create pictures. So you see here, okay, I now have two visuals of an app that could be used for Family Energy Hub. So it shows a bit like a complex app to monitor energy usage. And now I can actually click on these visuals, so to get a better picture. But also, if I click here on info, I actually get the prompt that DALL-E has created based on my prompt. So this picture has not been created based on my prompt. It has been created on the prompt that ChatGPT has created based on my prompt. So I could actually copy paste now this prompt and go back to my DALL-E and then further optimize this prompt that it's created. So if I don't like the color or maybe I'm missing something, then I can actually adjust this prompt to further optimize the picture. And I think this is really a revolutionary issue where you see that there is a kind of layer in between where my prompt is translated in other, much more professional, much more advanced prompts that subsequently are used to create the output. And I think this is not only the future for image generation, but I'm sure that in terms of text generation, advanced prompting, we will see this more and more. So in that way, I think it's quite intriguing that this is happening. But you also see in this way, you can very quickly create quite sophisticated, advanced visuals for instance, the first MVP of your startup. Okay. So let me go back to my presentation now. So that was a kind of a second use case that I wanted to show, where you can, by sophisticated prompting, push ChatGPT to do a lot of sophisticated ideation on a value proposition, and then you can even create a visual with DALL-E 3. A final use case that I want to show is about customer outreach and how you can actually automate customization of outreach to customers. And here I focus on a particular sales technique that exists, the challenger sale technique, which actually has as a philosophy that if you want to sell products or services to a customer, before you contact a customer, you really want to understand this customer so that you proactively can adequately describe to the customer why he or she would benefit from your product. So you want to do upfront a lot of research on your customer. What is the financial position of your customer? What have been strategic changes within your customer in the past year? So that you can use that information to really create a tailored kind of message for the customer to improve the likelihood of selling the product. And actually, we did an online bootcamp on generative AI some months ago, and one of the participants came up with this idea, okay, can we not use generative AI to kind of automate this challenger sale approach? And so this participant suggested like, okay, let's first try to analyze financial data, analyze kind of the strategic changes in the company, and subsequently use that information to make a tailored email to the customer that we want to approach. And then actually in the bootcamp, we took up this example to develop it. And we used as an example the company Personio, quite a famous startup nowadays in Germany that is selling HR automation software. And we took as a use case, quite randomly, that Personio would like to sell their HR automation platform to PowerUs. PowerUs, startup in Berlin from the WHU ecosystem, recently raised significant Series A funding. They are building a platform to connect handwerkers. And so the theoretical case we took is, let's imagine that Personio wants to sell their automation software to PowerUs. Can we use this challenger approach to convince them? And so as a first step, we want to get a good understanding of the financial situation of PowerUs. Now, there are different ways to do that. In Germany, you can go to the Bundesanzeiger to get financial information. We at WHU, we have a license to North-Data, where you can quite easily get this information. So here I went to North-Data, I typed in PowerUs, and then you get this kind of information. So for the 3 last years that are available, You get an overview with a number of metrics for each year, and you can easily download that information into a CSV file. So that's information that you can easily use. Now, what can we do with this? As a next step, we can actually go to, again, ChatGPT Plus, and let me show you again the example. And here we use a tool called data analysis. And maybe let me first show that. So if you start a new chat, again, if you have GPT-4, there is this thing called advanced data analysis. And you see, if you click on that, suddenly you can actually upload files in your prompts. And so if I press here on plus, I can actually upload files. I will not do it now. And so what we did here is, okay, I've downloaded this financial information of Power Us, and I've uploaded this CSV file into data analysis. And then I did the following prompts asking, examine these annual reports in detail to identify any variations in key metrics, such as cash conversion cycles and profit margin over the last 5 years. Make note of significant changes. And then actually, again, ChatGPT itself will start doing a lot of things behind the back. Actually, what is data analysis? Actually, it's a translator tool. So it translates human text into Python code, programming code, to execute what I want to do. So here you actually see that it starts running and creating Python code to execute my instruction. And actually, it was facing some issues here. So it was seeing that there were problems in terms of UTF-8 encoding. Now, people familiar with programming know that this can be a very, can really create headaches because encodings can be a mess. Now here, it in the end was able to solve it completely by itself. Yeah, so I'm not doing anything here. Yeah, so it's in the end, it was successfully able to use an alternative encoding. And then it asked me, okay, and for proceeding, can you tell me which rows and columns contain the relevant metrics? Are there any specific metrics that you're particularly interested in? So here it asked me to give some additional information. Now here I was quite lazy. So I just told it, okay, do it yourself. I don't care. So I just gave it as a response, try to identify metrics yourself. So I didn't give it a lot of input. And then it says, okay, understood. I will try to examine the CSV file myself. And then indeed, it was able to identify the different metrics that were present in the CSV file. And then it started analyzing these metrics. Yeah, so it's looking at, okay, to what extent is the total assets increasing or decreasing? What about revenues? What about equity? So it starts analyzing all these issues. And at the end, based on this analysis, it gave me a number of key observations. Yeah, so you see that with one very straightforward prompt, analyze this Excel, it actually gave me quite relevant and interesting information. So this data analysis tool is an extremely powerful tool, especially for all kinds of data science topics. Yeah? So in this way, you need the GPT Plus, but I think this is an extremely valuable tool for a lot of applications that you can think about. So that's what the first step was. Yeah? So here we have identified some key observations about Power Us and about their financial information. Subsequently, we also wanted, maybe another interesting thing that I actually recently used. So you can use data analysis, another approach, which actually I was quite surprised that it worked. So again, if you have the GPT-4 subscription and you go to the, let me just show it in a new chat. So if you just go to the default chat, you will see that you can actually upload pictures. So what can I do? I actually also took a screenshot of this financial overview that I got from Nordata. So I didn't download the data. No, I simply took a screenshot with my computer. And now I upload the screenshot into my prompt. And now I can say, okay, analyze me the financial performance of Power Us, focusing on yearly changes in key metrics. and summarize the core observations. So you see, I have the screenshots, and what was actually to my own surprise is that actually ChatGPT is perfectly able to read the numbers out of the screenshots and to subsequently analyze them. So here actually we didn't necessarily need to use this more advanced data analysis tool. Simply taking a screenshot, uploading it, and giving it the instruction to start analyzing the data is actually can be sufficient. So this was actually quite surprising to me. This weekend, maybe as a funny anecdote, my son was having a problem with homework for mathematics, and it was formulated in very complex German that I didn't understand. So there, to be honest, we in the end took a screenshot of the assignment that he needed to do, asked GPT to solve it, and then it was able to perfectly solve it, which triggers also some issues for teachers and homework, not only for professors, but I think also in high schools. I think there are some issues at hand. Luckily, I would say you need the subscription here, so maybe not every student will have access to it, but this is, of course, what the future looks like. So in that way, this kind of tools trigger quite some challenges if we start thinking about what do we do with homework, assignments, and all that kind of stuff, because as you can see, even quite a complex instruction like do me a financial analysis year over year with key observations, it can perfectly execute with a simple screenshot of a financial statement. So I think that's quite interesting to see. Okay, so that was the first step. Then, and this is something that we already did before, again, you can go to Perplexity AI and, for instance, ask, okay, investigate the company Power Us, investigate its websites to identify additional events so that I can make a customized offering. So let me show a bit how it looked in reality. Yeah, so investigate Power Us to see any significant changes. And then so it identified that in June 2021, Power Us announced a 10 million Series A funding round, and April 2020 posted on LinkedIn that the company was hiring different kinds of positions. Yeah? So again, here it will search on the internet, look for information about Power Us, and then will use that information to give me input. And that way the information tends to be quite reliable. So that's another step that you can do. And then I can simply go to ChatGPT or another tool, whatever you like, and you can say, look, I'm a founder and I want to sell automated HR solutions. My target customer is Power Us, and I want to create for this customer or I want to sell my product to this customer. Here are some key observations. Yeah, so here or then I just copy pasted the financial information that I had before. Here are some changes that Power Us has experienced, and based on that, write me a customized email, and then you will see it actually writes me a very nice email template that I can use to actually send an offer to Power Us. Yeah, so you will see if you read the text that it nicely uses some information of the financial statements, but also the fact that they started to recently hire additional people to explain why an HR automation platform could be very valuable for Power Us. Yeah, so in that way, you can see how you can first collect information with generative AI from different sources, bring that information together, and then ask ChatGPT to write you a customized email. Now, should you copy paste it and immediately send it? No, most of the time you will need to fine tune it. But again, and you can imagine that the time you can save by using this kind of tools can be quite enormous. Okay, so these were a number of tools and strategies that I wanted to share. Before we go into the Q&A, let me briefly highlight some things that we are offering to the community. So I briefly mentioned before that we organize regularly bootcamps, online bootcamps, where we train people much more in depth about how they can leverage generative AI for business applications. So there we go much deeper and actually also push our participants to immediately start applying these tools on their own particular setting. Yeah? So this example of the challenger strategy for customer outreach emerged out of the prior bootcamp, where we actually used the example of one of the participants to do it. So if you're interested in that, if you think it can make sense for you or some of your colleagues, we will organize a new online bootcamp that will start end of this month. And so it will be 3 sessions of 2 hours. Well, I will again show you a lot of tools and actually push you to work on them. You will also do a bit of group work with other participants online. So that also gives a kind of nice networking opportunity. So if you would be interested in it, you can always register for the bootcamp. And we have a Slack workspace where we simply try to share on a regular basis new insights that are emerging. For instance, today, there was the development conference of OpenAI, where they are likely at the moment announcing some new tools, mainly for developers, but that already will give a kind of picture about what is happening in the future with generative AI. So when we will see some new insights, we will also share it into our Slack space. So if you want to become a member, here on the slides, you have the link to become a member, but you can always also reach out to me via LinkedIn if you want to become a member later on. So that's simply something that we wanted to share with our community. Okay, these are the examples, the tools that I wanted to illustrate. I hope it gave you some inspiration about what you can do with generative AI to help you in your day-to-day activities. If you need some additional sources, here are some suggestions about very nice podcasts that I think give nice background information on the topic of generative AI. Again, we will send you the slides so you can click on the links later on. I also added some more kind of fictional material that actually might help you to think a bit, okay, what is the future of AI? Unfortunately, these examples typically focus on the dark side of AI. So it typically shows how AI might go wrong. And again, I fear that's quite a realistic probability. So on the one hand, I see a lot of potential, but I also see a lot of dangers. That's not the focus today, but I think we really need to be careful with some of the things that we are doing today, but maybe we can also briefly talk about it in the discussion. Okay, that's what I wanted to share. So I suggest that we end here the presentation part, and then we can briefly go into the Q&A if there are questions. Niklas, go ahead.
Perfect. I'll hit you with the questions. We received 50 questions so far. I would say maybe we start a bit with the one that are related to the respective use cases that you showed in the webinar.
Yep.
So the first one was regarding the chain of thoughts, and that was David, who was wondering why you use the web pilot plugin instead of the regular web connection through Bing, and if there are any advantages of this approach.
My experience is that in ChatGPT, this web pilot plugin sometimes tends to perform better than the BingChat. Why? I have no idea. This is simply based on using it, trying it, but they theoretically do the same thing. They both go to the internet and search things. My experience is that in this chain of thought prompting, web pilot tends to work better than Bing search. Sometimes Bing search then suddenly stops. Don't ask me why, but that's just my experience.
Yeah, perfect. Then we had some questions regarding DALL-E 3. I think that's also something that we have seen previously, that if you create prompts where you ask to also write text, sometimes the spelling of the text is a bit strange. Is there a way to make DALL-E 3 use the exact...
Nope. No, so that's still a very significant limitation, although DALL-E 3 is already a significant improvement to what has been there before. So before, most people used Midjourney, and there actually adding text was quasi impossible. With DALL-E, it works to some extent. Sometimes you need to try 2-3 times before it doesn't have any spelling errors. But the problem is, so it doesn't really write text. It reproduces pixels. And that's why it very easily can create spelling errors. But my experience is that with limited text, it might work quite nicely nowadays. And maybe you have to try 2-3 times. But for instance, if you would like to add a sentence, then I have not managed to do it.
Maybe also a question related to that: if you have the image outputted and you want to make minor adjustments to the image, is that possible?
Yes, and then again then copy this prompt that it uses, and then in that prompt add minor adjustments. You can do that. There are actually more professional image generation tools. So I think Adobe has a tool. And there, I think you can do it much more professionally. But yeah, I'm not a designer, so I've not go that deep into it. So if you really want to make fine-grained changes, you can do that. I know Midjourney also allows you to do it. So then if you really need to kind of tailor the images very specifically, then I would encourage you to really use the more professional tools that are out there that are really developed for designers, I would say.
Great. And then on the next case, the Power US financial analysis case, Jonas Link was wondering about your opinion of the reliability of the data analysis plugin.
My experience is that's very good, very reliable. Moreover, and that's something I didn't show, maybe I can do that. So let me briefly reshare my screen because it's actually a good comment. Let me see if I can quickly get into a ChatGPT application here. Yeah, let me just start a new one. So I will have to share my screen again, but let me first activate it. Okay. Yes, so let me see where I have maybe a data analysis tool that I can quickly show you. Yeah, here I think. Yeah, it's opening. So what you see here, here we actually do even more sophisticated data analysis in ChatGPT. So that's all possible. And actually what you can see here, every time when it runs, it allows you to click on show work. And then actually it gives you the full Python code of that particular step that is executed. And you can just copy that code and copy it into your own Python environment so that you can fully replicate what ChatGPT is doing. So in that way, if you really need to be very careful, you can every time copy paste the Python code and then replicate it. Of course, then you need to be able to work with Python. That might be a limitation for quite some people. But if you're a data scientist, and most people nowadays can work with Python, so they should be able to do it. But that's a way how you can double check everything that it's doing. Yeah, so that's a potential way to double check. In my experience, actually, it's quite reliable.
Thank you. Then we have some more questions now on DALL-E 3. First, is it possible to have a specific style? Apparently, copyright kicks in relatively quickly, and I think then DALL-E restricts the prompts. Are there any suggestions to avoid that potentially?
No, what I hear is that the current policy is that if you write it in the style of a person, if the person is still alive, ChatGPT will not allow you to do it. Because then there are apparently, they fear that there might be intellectual property issues that they don't want to delve in. If you want to have it in a style of a painter that has been dead for 100 years, then it will typically work. But you see that with DALL-E 3, they have become much more careful in terms of intellectual property issues. So they have put clear restrictions, and it will be difficult to circumvent them. If you really want to do that, then I think you need to go to more open source applications like Stable Diffusion. Yeah, so Stable Diffusion tends to be less concerned about intellectual property, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing that goes a bit beyond the scope of what we discussed today. Again, that's typically some AI systems are more data privacy sensitive, others are less. So it's also a bit up to you to decide, okay, how much risk do I want to take? That's up to you.
I think you answered already in a direction that was then kind of the next question. So basically, are there any open source alternatives to DALL-E 3 and anything that you would recommend?
Yeah, so Stable Diffusion, I think, is the most famous one nowadays. But actually, you have Bing Image Generator. Yeah, so that's in Microsoft. So if you go to Bing Image Generator, that actually uses DALL-E 3, and it's for free. So it does exactly the same. The only thing it doesn't do is this thing about creating a prompt based on your prompt. So in Bing Image Generator, it will generate the image based on your prompt. So this in-between step where DALL-E translates your prompt in another prompt, that's not happening in the Bing Image Generator. But apart from that, it's actually also quite good, and that's for free.
Perfect. Sounds good. I think we also had quite a few questions regarding the possibility to kind of auto-create McKinsey-like presentation slides from the prompts. Is there any tool or any possibility you can suggest or recommend?
No, I think, again, so you can say, you can prompt GPT saying, you're a fantastic consultant that is specialized in writing consulting reports about strategic topics. I want you now to write a report, I don't know, about the future of the health industry and how it can use AI to become more productive. And with that kind of prompts, I think you very quickly will generate a professionally looking consulting report. Of course, we all know it's not that difficult, but I think that's what it can perfectly do. And typically, what also makes sense is typically ChatGPT tends to be a bit enthusiastic and a bit American in their language. So what I would typically do also when I, for instance, use ChatGPT to write the first draft of LinkedIn messages, I would typically see, I'm a professional German. And then suddenly it starts to become much less emotional and American. So actually just telling ChatGPT that you're a professional German typically helps to scale it down in terms of the emotions.
Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. Yeah, I think a very good question was basically, how do you ensure to stay up to date with all these fastly advancing prompting techniques and the new generative AI solutions?
Nah, it is very challenging at the moment because there is so much happening. Of course, I think like on LinkedIn or on X, if you follow a number of people, you typically get some quite nice updates, and then you can experiment a bit yourself. Also on YouTube, there are some people that really keep track of the most recent developments. So that's a bit how I try to do it, simply looking at my LinkedIn feeds. Unfortunately, nowadays, there are this kind of LinkedIn influencers that are not really about giving new insights, but just want to get a lot of clicks, and that's a bit annoying. But there are some good people that you can follow. For instance, Ethan Mullick from Wharton, he's a very good scholar that is very deep also in how to use GPT. That's one that is really helpful. So there are some good people to follow. And then it's also a bit simply, what I try to do is simply every weekend spend some hours on trying stuff out, playing a bit with it. And in that way, you can quite quickly make a lot of progress. And it's like with everything, you just need to invest time in it. So the more time you invest in it, the better you get in it and the more natural it becomes.
Are there some specific experts that you have in mind that you would recommend on LinkedIn?
Yeah, so Ethan Mullick, I would say that's a name that now pops up into my mind. And again, so if people go to our Slack channel, they will see that I once in a while also share then LinkedIn posts of other people that have said interesting things. So there definitely you can find some inspiration.
I think most people actually wondered earlier regarding the PowerPoint topic, like if you can actually work with the format of PowerPoint, right, to create slides or maybe to also adjust slides from a format to another format. If these kind of tasks are somehow possible with OpenAI.
It's at the moment very limited. So in PowerPoint, you can code with what is called, I think it's VCA code. So you can actually ask ChatGPT to write VCA code for a slide, and then you can copy paste that code into a PowerPoint, and then it will generate your slide. But to be very honest, it's quite complex and time consuming. However, Microsoft will launch on November 26 their Copilot for Microsoft PowerPoint, and that will completely change the game. And so then you will simply be able to open your PowerPoint and write a prompt saying, okay, create me a PowerPoint deck based on this Word file, and it will perfectly do that. Yeah? So I think actually November 26 will be a date to remember, because we will never use Excel, PowerPoint, or Word like we used before. Because if this Copilot is fully integrated into these applications, yeah, it will really, I think, change a lot of people's daily working activities quite drastically. We have already Copilot in MS Visual, so the programming environment of Microsoft. So I use Copilot there, and it's quite amazing to see what you can do with Copilot. It almost guesses what you're thinking, and my speed of programming, I think, has accelerated by 10 by using Copilot. So in that way, it's quite amazing. Nicholas, I think you also use it, not Copilot.
Quite a lot, but yeah, saved me already a couple of months in coding.
But so it will be the same in Microsoft's Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. I think this will really, for me, be the next revolution in generative AI. So last year we had ChatGPT being launched, and suddenly everybody realized what generative AI will be. And I think when this Copilot will be launched, then suddenly everybody will really start understanding the power of generative AI and how it can create our work, make our work much more efficient.
Perfect. Exciting times. We have some more general questions if we still have time.
Yeah, we can. I think let's go until 9:15 and then we can.
Perfect. Martin Abel was wondering if ChatGPT becomes more accurate if there are prior prompts in the same chat.
Yes, but it also tends to forget after a while. So it might be that if you do quite some prompting, that it starts forgetting what has been mentioned in prior prompts. So I actually always try to write, instead of doing a lot of prompts, I try to do like this chain of thought prompts where you ask it in one single prompt to do a lot of stuff. Again, that's my preference based on my own experiences. I don't have academic research to support that or something like that, but in general, that's my experience.
Yeah,
there is a risk that it starts forgetting.
I actually had the same impression, and what also helped for me is a bit to ask it, basically to ask me before it proceeds with continuing. So if you have these very long prompts, then this actually also enforces this chain of prompting a bit. Yeah. I think there was also a question right in the beginning regarding your opinion on Google Bard. I assume in comparison to the tools that you showed.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in Google Bard, and maybe I didn't work enough with it, but every time that I tried it, I was completely surprised about the level of hallucination, that it hallucinated much more. So then I do the same kind of prompts that I would do in ChatGPT or in BingChat, and the level of hallucination simply tends to be much higher. Why, I don't know, but yeah, so I'm not impressed by Bard. Of course, there is this big rumor that they will introduce Gemini, and that apparently would be even a much more powerful model than GPT. We will see. But I'm not using Bard, to be very honest. I simply don't feel confident using it.
Mm-hmm. We also received a question whether the startup branding with the ChatGPT prompt basically takes into account copyrights.
How do which copyright in the?
So if you, for example, ask it to create a brand of a startup based on some inputs, then would it also take into account copyrights of other startups, for example? I think that's
for a visual.
For example, yeah, of the logo, brand logo, etc.
Yeah, and also there, DALL-E is quite restricted. So it will be very difficult to use existing logos of brands in DALL-E. Then again, it will typically not allow you to do that. So they are nowadays quite sensitive about intellectual property issues.
Mm-hmm. Professor Ove Jensen asks if there are any performance differences between prompting in German versus English.
To be honest, I mainly do it in English. My experience is so I sometimes do it in Dutch because I'm Dutch native. I don't see big differences. And as far as I know, also the way GPT is trained as a kind of network, there should not be big differences. So I'm actually, of course, it depends a bit on the amount of text that it's received, but I think for languages where it was able to get a reasonable amount of texts in the initial training of the GPT model or whatever model you use, then I think the differences should not be that outspoken.
Perfect. I think there's also one question regarding general recommendations on certain ChatGPT plugins that people should try out. Do you have anything in mind?
Yeah, so I think the web pilot one I use a lot. You also have the read link. So read link is one where you can put a link, also a link to files in your own Google Drive, and then it will read the documents that are in the link. And I also use VoxScript, and VoxScript is a plugin that allows you to analyze text from YouTube videos. So there are, now it's a bit of a jungle, this whole plugin thing. So there are a limited number of high quality plugins, but there is also a lot of garbage. And sometimes in terms of security, it's not always 100% clear if this what you really do when you use the plugins. So I tend to use only a restricted number of plugins where there is a kind of consensus that they are high quality and that they are secure. But of course, also there are continuous risks. For instance, I was talking about DALL-E. A big thing on the internet now was that people were, so you can, with this chat vision, you can read pictures, but then people kind of created pictures where they put text in white on top of the picture, so you cannot see it, but ChatGPT can read the text. And so then it can give quite strange restrictions that can actually trigger that it starts hacking your computer and stuff like that. So also there are some security issues for which we are not fully prepared, I fear.
That makes sense. So I also saw that some plugins ask you to, for example, upload the data on their website, right? That's when it becomes a bit strange. Alfonso Ravasco was wondering if you tried Clock, the new AI tool by X, and what differences you see from ChatGPT.
No, I did not yet try it. So I cannot make any statement here.
Okay. Then
no, but for what I saw on LinkedIn, people were not very impressed. So I think at least what I saw on LinkedIn was that the consensus was that it definitely doesn't have the quality standards of GPT or Claude, so that it's not reaching that kind of standards at the moment.
Yep.
But I didn't try it myself.
Then we had one more question on potential risks to corporate intellectual property when people, for example, upload internal papers. So how do you evaluate that?
That risk exists, but at the same time, if you're really doing it in a corporate setting, there are today already all kinds of solutions to have the firewalls. So I know that quite some big corporates are developing their own kind of ChatGPT system so that they can use OpenAI, but in a fully data compliant way, but even for all the German Datenschutz, whatever, compliant. So I will do a keynote at BASF in a few weeks, and they, for instance, have created BASF Chat, and so it's a fully GPT embedded applications in the Teams environments, but that is at the same time fully data compliant. Of course, that will trigger some costs, and of course, a company like BASF can do that. Whether a simple startup can do it, that's a different question. But I think nowadays we see that very quickly a lot of solutions are emerging that make it possible. I also know that, for instance, on Azure, the Windows cloud, there are a lot of different kinds of enterprise solutions that allow you to create a fully isolated GPT system where the risk of data leakage is heavily reduced. So in that way, I think these things are being developed. And the only thing I would say is, I think companies can no longer use data security, data privacy as an excuse to not engage in generative AI. So I think that reflex is no longer relevant.
I think we received a question that kind of goes along. So how should basically employees now shift their mindset in order to embrace the collaboration of AI in basically, and not see it as a risk, but rather as an enhancement? So how do you see, will this happen, or might this happen in corporates?
No, I think it's an important mind, because I think the companies that will react very defensive or conservative, they will simply be outcompeted. Again, if you look at the examples that I showed today, kind of the speed, the acceleration that you can do, imagine that your competitor uses these tools and you don't, you can easily see how very quickly you will be totally outcompeted. So I think we don't have an alternative. And again, I'm not saying that there are no risks and dangers. I actually think there are a lot of dangers. I think we will see terrible things happening in terms of identity theft, frauds with generative AI in the next months, and we are not prepared for it. And for instance, a lot of the high-level specialists in AI have been saying we should never have allowed that we already have the connection between the generative AI and the internet. This is a black box that we opened that should not have been opened already. So it should have been a closed system. Now, it has happened. So the box of Pandora has opened, and I think we have to live with that. But I'm also sure that we will see quite some disasters happening in the next months where fraud, identity theft will be happening. And we are not prepared for it. But yeah, I think we simply have to some extent accept it.
Great. Maybe one last question, shifting away a bit from the security concerns and more back into the use cases. Do you have any suggestions regarding prompts or tools to create and shape a customer's persona? I think you might have had some use cases in the previous workshop.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we have done that ourselves. So you can, for instance, if you have LinkedIn profiles, you can kind of upload LinkedIn profiles, for instance, in this Claude AI system, and then ask it to generate personas based on these LinkedIn profiles, and that actually works quite nicely. So actually, LinkedIn data, in my experience, are a very nice data source to play around with in ChatGPT. So you can do a lot of nice things. Also with this data analysis tool, for instance, if you have LinkedIn data, you can just plug it in and say, okay, out of these data, who are the most interesting people for me to be a mentor for the next pitching competition? And then it will nicely, based on the description, select the people out of the data that you have. So for persona generation, again, customization, marketing, kind of combining LinkedIn data with generative AI has a lot of potential.
Perfect. I think that is was a great last question.
Maybe that should be the topic for our next webinar, how to leverage LinkedIn data with generative AI. So it's a very relevant point, actually. Okay, then I would like to thank everybody for attending. I hope you got some inspiration. Thanks for all the questions. That was very nice. It also gives us a good feeling about what kind of questions people have with this kind of applications. So again, we hope you enjoyed it. We will send you the slides. We will also put the video on YouTube if you want to watch it again, or if you want to forward it to some of your colleagues, please don't hesitate to do it. And again, if you're interested in the Bootcamp or in the Slack workspace, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you.